Hi, hello people. I've been wanting to make a video showing how I paint darker skin tones and how I use gold leaf, so I decided to paint the amazing, incredible, one and only Simone Biles. I'm using this Soho 9" by 12" canvas panel. To sketch, I'm using my go-to purple Prismacolor Color Erase pencil because we tolerate only graphite slander in this household. If you've ever tried erasing graphite from canvas, you know what true pain feels like. To start, I'm sketching out very loose shapes based on my first glance at the reference photo. I'm not aiming to be accurate, but just to roughly establish where the features are relative to each other so I have something to work off of. After I have my rough outline, the first place I focus on when sketching is always the nose. Because it's in the center of the face, it helps establish relative angle, distance, and proportion. So when I'm sketching all the other facial features, I always check to see where and how they line up with the nose. As you can see, my sketching process involves a lot of erasing and redrawing. It's basically a series of small adjustments until it looks right to me. And I'm using this Tombow Mono Knock Eraser for erasing small details. Here is the finished sketch. Now for the gold leaf background. For the glue, I'm applying Mona Lisa adhesive size with a cheap craft brush that's on the brink of passing away. I would recommend having a designated shitty brush because the glue pretty much does not wash out at all. After putting down a layer of glue, you have to wait like half an hour for it to fully dry. The wet glue is like a milky white color, and you can tell it's dry when it becomes transparent. If you don't wait for it to dry all the way, the gold leaf won't stick, and you'll probably end up with holes. While I'm waiting, I usually have a 5-course meal, brush my pet llama, and recite Super Bass by Nicki Minaj. The gold leaf I'm using is, surprise, not real gold, because unfortunately, YouTube ads do not give me that kind of money. So I use Mona Lisa imitation gold leaf, which is an alloy of 85% copper and 15% zinc. It comes in these little booklet things with square sheets. They're very thin, so I'm just carefully laying them down and using my fingers to feel for areas on the canvas that are still sticky. After I've covered all the glued areas, I make light circular motions with a fluffy brush to dust away the gold leaf. The gold leaf is super delicate, so don't press too hard or you might scratch it or rub it away. Just a heads up, gold leaf is extremely messy and requires quite a bit of patience. You might find little crumbs in your hair and on your clothes. You might end up inhaling it. You might cry multiple times, but at least it looks pretty. I save the big crumbs in a Ziploc bag to use for later, and then I use my whole life mini vacuum to clean up the rest. The biggest oof about imitation gold leaf is that it tarnishes really easily, which usually ends up looking like dark or greenish streaks. Imitation gold leaf will tarnish just from exposure to air over time through the process of oxidation, and acrylic paints and mediums accelerate oxidation because they contain ammonia. So to prevent this, you have to seal the gold leaf. I use this Mona Lisa sealer, which I apply with a sponge brush to minimize streaking, and then I wait for it to fully dry before I start painting. A lot of people have asked why I do the gold leaf first instead of last. First of all, I always do backgrounds first because it just makes the most sense spatially, since you'll end up painting over it somewhat with the foreground anyway. And second of all, I find that paint is a lot easier to control than the gold leaf because the gold is really messy and sometimes sticks places you did not intend. So if you do the gold leaf first, you can just paint over your boo-boos later. For painting, I used an assortment of flat brushes in different sizes, and for small details, a few brushes from the Zen Art Fine Line Miniature Brush Set. And as always, the acrylic paints I use are Golden, Liquitex, and Arteza. As per usual, I start with a watered down underpainting to establish my colors, give myself a base layer to work off of, and visually section off and establish the boundaries of the different regions of the painting. With paint, there are many ways to mix brown, especially by accident, but my favorite way is to mix purple with yellow ochre. Bruh. Okay, know at this stage it looks like a hate crime, but I promise you it gets better. With acrylics, you want to work dark to light, which is the opposite of what you do with transparent paints like watercolors. So I start off by mapping out the shadow regions of the face. I'm exaggerating my purples a little, since shadow areas are generally cooler toned, and also I just really like purple. I find that slightly overemphasizing saturation or hue, like making a cooler toned region more blue, or using a brighter shade of blue, helps make the painting pop. But I try not to go too overboard in order to stay within the realm of plausibility. As I layer up, I place my midtones, which I usually make the most saturated. After that, I fill in the lightest areas. But I'm not using a super light color, which allows me to build up the transition from light to dark more gradually. I find that too much contrast between midtones and large light regions kind of flattens the depth, especially for darker skin. The mouth colors aren't that different from the skin, which is usually the case unless the person is wearing lipstick. I'm just adding some magenta and a little more purple. I continue building up by just repeating the cycle of shadows to midtones to highlights. And generally, I use bigger brushes for darker areas and smaller brushes as I build up to lighter areas. Because acrylics dry so fast, I don't really blend my paint, but instead create the illusion of blending by placing similar colors next to each other, so it looks like a natural transition. When painting darker skin, I find that using more warm tones, like oranges and reds, helps prevent it from looking washed out and lifeless. But also, even though I'm giving general tips, pay attention to the specific person you're painting, because beyond lighting differences, individual people have skin tones that differ not just in darkness or lightness, but also in undertones of like blue or yellow or red, for example. I save the brightest highlights for the very end, after I'm pretty much done with rendering the skin. The whites of the eyes are actually darker than you might think, so darkening your eye whites is one of the easiest ways to make your portrait look more realistic and less scary. If you were one of those kids who would doodle eyes on your math homework in middle school, you might know that the darkest shadow is directly under the top lash line. For the eyelashes, using fluid acrylics makes it so much easier. Here I mixed anthracnone blue with alizarin crimson and a little bit of Indian yellow. These Zen art brushes are a godsend for eyelashes and eyebrows. If you're interested, my affiliate link is in the description. I'm making upward flicking motions, applying a bit of pressure at the base and then releasing outward. When I'm painting faces, I usually reserve pure white only for eye highlights, and sometimes for lips too. You'll often find these super bright highlights on top of the iris and eye whites, at the corner of the eye, at the waterline, and beneath the lower lash line. For the hair, I'm starting with the darkest areas, again using a mix of these colors. To get the texture at the roots of her hair, I'm using this little brush that's kind of destroyed with very frayed bristles, and then I'm lightly making circular motions and then building up the opacity. Now I'm filling in the midtones. Finally, I'm using a smaller brush for highlights. So I never watch sports, like ever. Okay, I did watch some Olympics highlights on YouTube, but fun fact, I did rhythmic gymnastics until I was like 9 when I had to quit because I hurt my back. So because I used to be a gymnast, I've been somewhat paying attention to women's gymnastics over the years, kind of. So for a long time, Simone Biles has been the one athlete I've been weirdly invested in. Anyway, I, like many other people, was very much looking forward to seeing her compete at the Olympics and do a million backflips and win a million gold medals. So when she withdrew from her events, I, like many other people, was disappointed. But I thought it was so brave. So many people criticized her for being selfish, which I find ridiculous. We're not entitled to her victory. And she knew she wasn't in the right headspace to give a strong or even safe performance, so she sat out and sacrificed the spotlight so she wouldn't drag down her teammates. That's the opposite of selfishness. Simone took a stand. She put her foot down on the biggest stage in the world, insisting that mental injury be taken just as seriously as physical, that strength be defined not just by speed or muscle, but by the inner workings of the human soul. Especially in the light of the historical and ongoing dehumanization and degradation of Black women, I find it incredible and beautiful that Black women athletes like Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka are at the vanguard of this push to recognize and prioritize their humanity. In a way, sitting out a tennis tournament or an uneven bars routine is an act of revolution. Hopefully, their actions will serve to decouple the trope of mental illness or struggles as arising from flaws in character or willpower. Just because something's invisible doesn't mean it shouldn't be taken seriously. And with our big boy imaginations and our big boy brains, I strongly believe humans are fully capable of grappling with intangible things, but only if we choose empathy. So much judgment and stigma around mental health comes from an active choice against empathy, in favor of a self-righteous moral superiority. If feeling better about yourself comes at the expense of other people, then maybe you don't deserve to feel better about yourself. To finish off, I'm adding some streaks of gold leaf, which involves repeating the whole gluing, drying, leafing, brushing, sealing process. I like adding these streaks at the end because I think it makes the portrait a little less boring and it provides some interaction between the foreground and background. Last but not least, I'm sealing the painting with some Gamblin Gamvar gloss varnish, which is an oil-based varnish, so it's fine to use on top of imitation gold leaf. The other varnish I have is Liquitex, which dries a lot faster and provides a more solid finish, but it contains ammonia, so it's a no-no for gold leaf. Here is the final product. Link in the description if you want to buy a print and support me. Thank you! Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a beautiful day.